So it's still so surreal to think that it's time to talk about this game again. Xenoblade X for so long has been my favourite Xeno game, and now myself and a completely new generation of players get to experience it all over again, with new story elements added on, possibly giving us some conclusion to at least a few of the many questions that have gone unanswered for the past 10 years. Within this video, I'll be exploring the potential and possibility of the new story content that could and may be added to Xenoblade X for the first time ever. Of course, this video will include heavy Xenoblade X spoilers, so I advise anyone who hasn't played the game and is concerned about spoilers to click off this video now, and I'll catch you in the next one. But for those few brave souls who are ready to make the plunge with me, let's take a dive into what the brand new story for Xenoblade X could entail. As always, if you enjoy my content and want to help support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing, as it's free and it helps me out a ton. With all that out of the way, let's get right into the video. So when it comes to new story elements, our minds of course think straight to the epilogue and how the story will continue, but that might not be the only story elements that have been added. Xenoblade X's story has been considered on the weak side in the past, with myself included, feeling as if some elements weren't sufficiently fleshed out, and this is the perfect opportunity to do something about it. And Nintendo didn't specify just a brand new side story, instead new story elements. In particular, Chapter 7 could really use some work, as it's the only mission where nothing is really achieved. The mission begins with Lin cooking Tatsu, your squadron getting deployed to Oblivia to meet up and assist Irina. You fight a couple of Ganglion soldiers, go meet up with Irina once again in front of the part of the Lifehold, get ambushed by the Ganglion, and defeat Goetia in a boss battle. Oh yeah, and Elmer is racist too.
That's enough, Samarian witch.
But I hope you see my point. Aside from defeating Goetia, you learn nothing, you don't gain anything, and the whole thing just feels like a waste of time. I'm not gonna sit here and say the whole story should change. In fact, I think most of the story will be near identical from the original Wii game, and I expect that this chapter will still give us the important story beats like defeating Goetia and learning a tad more about Irina, but I can see extra new things being added, or at least I hope so. As for the actual new story though, well, that's harder to pin down. With the info we have so far and at present, there's two realistic ways which I can see Monolith going about this. Firstly, they can go down the future connected style DLC route, where the extra story content is accessible, likely from the start of the game, and takes place in its own completely isolated adventure. Or there's the second route, where these new story details act as an extension to the existing story, effectively functioning like a chapter 13, 14, and so on. Personally, I'm leaning towards the latter, as this means that to experience this new story, everyone has to play through Xenoblade X once again themselves, refreshing their minds of the story for both new and old players alike, as well as allowing us to continue playing with the existing party members that we possess, instead of us potentially getting limited to a new cast of characters, likely centered around Lao and the mysterious hooded figure. This prevents some of the weird balancing issues that were present in Future Connected, like when you were level 60 but had no gems, so were underpowered versus most enemies, and means that the team doesn't need to invest the time or resources to create and generate a whole brand new area for us to traverse. And that's not even mentioning how all of this would work with the game's multiplayer systems, or the fact that this story is normally focused and centered around your own custom Blade character. That's not to say that a new cast of characters and a new map to explore is particularly a bad thing, but this time around, I just don't think it's necessary. There is no incomplete or scrapped area that was planned to be in X hidden away in the files, and the world of Mira still has so much more to offer us. But however they decide to structure it, I'm sure it's still going to be the absolute time of our lives. So what about the actual narrative? What do I think is going to be the focus or take place during these extra story missions? Well, the one thing I am particularly confident in is that it will in some way revolve around the Pioneer plaque, which we see at the very start of the game during the intro segment floating through space. Now, this might not seem all that important at first glance, especially as it doesn't show up for the remaining 90% of the story, but right at the end of the game, as Lau is moments away from passing on, the camera directs our attention to the inside of the Ganglions Rose Garden mothership, where it now resides, before it magically starts glowing. Previously, we had no idea what this meant or what the significance of the plaque may be, but considering the timing of when this all happens, and the fact that these new story elements will likely be focused towards the story's end, I believe that it's likely we will learn more about that particular artifact. As of right now, however, the best theory I have for you ties back into the mysterious hooded figure. Like I said in the previous video, I'm not sold on the idea of this actually being Malos, as I think that it's far more likely for this to either be the lone hero or an actual, real, flesh and blood version of Lau, which is a massive crackpot theory we won't be exploring today. But that said, the plaque does kinda act like a core crystal does when bonding with a driver, and if Malos's core crystal were to be hidden somewhere nearby, allowing him to show up in this scene, I think this is a pretty good and clever way to do it, either by integrating his core with the plaque in some way, or doing a Fiora Lucky 7 situation, and this being Malos in some way. In addition, I also reckon that we may see more of the Klurian race, who, as I talked about before in the Art of Mira video, seemingly were originally planned to be far larger and more important entities to this story. With the introduction of Treon technology, found exclusively within the Clue sector, according to Luxar, we could perhaps see the full introduction and integration of their race, with them possibly taking over the lead role now that the Ganglion have been largely defeated. This doesn't necessarily mean that they would be the primary antagonist for this part of the story, but as I described before, a simple misunderstanding between both them and us with the existence of Celica and Rock could lead to an initial conflict before the both of them align forces to face a common enemy. Even so, who would they be facing? Originally, I stated that it would be the Black Knight who shows up, intending to interfere with the humans' relations in his custom Skell. But now that he seems more down to earth and less hostile, who could instead take his place? Well, this could possibly actually tie back into what I was talking about earlier relating to Goetia and her demise. You see, Xenoblade X never really gives us a clear defined death for any of the major Ganglion bosses aside from Luxar. Instead, we just see the remains of their respective skulls in a large heap on the floor, leaving us with a very real possibility that they are actually still alive. And so, in this extra story, what remains of the Ganglion forces may rally behind one of these previous leaders, determined to take vengeance for their fallen leader. Or maybe this will be a completely new original enemy that our heroes need to overcome, like the Fog King in Future Connected. Hey, that might actually work! That brings us on to the last question for today's video. Do I think this story will be used to connect Xenoblade X to the Klaus Saga? Well, no. Yes, maybe, I mean, kinda. It's like I said before, despite both now having a version of Project Exodus and the Earthlife colonization project, it's incredibly unlikely, or maybe closer to nigh impossible, that both of these events can be the same and occur at the same time. I still stand by the idea that the new Xenoblade X Earth could be a New Jerusalem type deal, as this is a concept Takahashi has regularly used in the past, but let's assume for an instance that this is wrong. How else could they connect it together? Well, the main answer I'm following at the moment is the theory surrounding the Ogdoad, which I briefly explored in the previous video. Xenoblade X is treated as a sort of middle point of the Gnostic Ogdoad story, representing the theme of exile and being attributed to the human race, effectively being exiled from their home planet, Earth, yet still forced and guided down the road towards the ascension of the Ogdoad, which is effectively the endgame of the Gnostic timeline. In fact, you can kind of understand this idea a bit through this line that Lynn states in the recent trailer, capturing the essence of this particular theme.
And our future was uncertain. We had no idea what fate lay in store for us. Only that we had to keep living in order to see it.
Even so, to bring up and introduce this concept in the extra story, I just expect to see certain story elements hint at or bring up the presence and existence of an Ogdoad type concept within this universe. Possibly by having the Kalurians or a new alien race, possibly even L, giving his true form the potential to appear, providing the revelation of this being how their existence works. Alternatively, a connection to the Klaus Saga may be far more subtle, tying into one of the elements in Xenoblade X which we've theorized about for years. For instance, they could go down the route of explaining the Dark God sword the Vita wields is an actual Monado, or explore the Vita itself and tie it into some form of Ouroboros creation. Or maybe even do what we all want and reveal that the Great One, which Luxar was constantly referring to, was actually Dmitry Yuriev, showing us that our supreme overlord has resurrected and returned once more to grace our presence and screens. Either way, I can see the extra story content just adding and providing a few more hints, especially with how the recent trailer only displayed the bare minimum for its announcement. In fact, rather cleverly, certain important details seem to have been omitted from this announcement trailer from the beginning of the game. This mostly pertains to the ghosts themselves, with their mothership not being shown once, and the Earth not being destroyed either. The former is of particular interest, however, as many of us have mentioned before, it has a striking resemblance to that of Origin from Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and I believe, similar to how Alvis's key was replaced by his core crystal, the ghost ship may be visually updated to further resemble Origin. Now this in and of itself is particularly interesting, but does this mean that the enemy for the DLC will tie into the ghosts? I personally think not. Like many of you as well, the announcement of the definitive edition for this game gives me a lot of hope that the next game will be a sequel to Xenoblade X, going by whatever name they choose to go for. I'm personally on Team Xenoblade Y. The thing is, this extra story, or however it is implemented, doesn't need to give us all the answers just yet, and I expect it to simply set up some new story aspects and connections for the upcoming games. So the most I think we would see is a short cinematic at our new finishing point, possibly showing the inhabitants of New LA before the camera begins zooming out, getting further and further away, before we can barely spot Mira as a mere speck within the expanse of space, as the ghosts are then seen making their way towards Mira, fading to black with the words, "This story never truly ends," once again, popping up on screen and providing us with a conclusive ending to Xenoblade Chronicles X. That's all I have today, folks, but if you'd like to see more on the topics of how the real flesh and blood Lao may return, or a more in-depth explanation on the Ogdoad system, make sure once again to like this video and subscribe to the channel. YouTube tells me that around 90% of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed, and I'd greatly appreciate you considering clicking that little red button. With that all out of the way, I thank you for watching this video once more, and I'll catch you in the next one. This is JB, signing off.